Hi, this is Wendy Hammond from World Renew, and this is a replay of the Helping That Helps webinar at Christmas and beyond. The presenters are Andrew Ryskamp, the CRCNA Diaconal Ministry Initiative, and VandenBrink from National Director of Diaconal Ministries Canada. And I'm the host, Wendy Hammond, Church Relations US, World Renew. For the webinar, we talked about the definition of poverty, when helping hurts, principles for helping that helps, practical examples in the local context, and then practical examples from the international context. When we talk about poverty, we often think of things that are basically talking about things that people need or lack. But really, people in poverty describe a much deeper issue than that. We talk about a broken relationship with God, self, creation, and others. And these involve systems, economic system, social systems, religious system, and political system. We won't get too much into this today, but if you'd like to know more about some of the theology and research around poverty, I highly recommend the books When Helping Hurts and Walking with the Poor. When we see people or think about outreach to people in need, we often come at it from a needs-based perspective, which can really hurt the people we're trying to help. When we see someone like this, we often think of the lack of money, the lack of education, we think about addiction, bad decisions, physical illness, disempowering them. We don't really think about the pursuit of justice. It's very materially focused. So what's an alternative to this if this can be harmful to people? We can look at assets, and by assets we mean looking for things that are already there. So rather than going out and thinking, okay, what can we as a church do to fix these needs, we can look at what are the assets that are already there. People who are best able to deal with a problem are those who are most affected. The focus is on building relationships, people over programs. Also, it builds capacity from within for long-term impact and sustainability. Ownership and motivation are very important for sustainable change. It also leverages resources for greater impact, so partnerships. And dignity. It affirms the strengths and potential in everyone. We talk about relief versus development. We have relief and betterment, which is most appropriately used in an emergency situation. That is when people are incapable of helping themselves, and that would be an example of like a disaster or war. The people really didn't have that much to do with the situation they're in. It was beyond their control, and they don't have a way of overcoming that. On the other side, we have rehabilitation and development. And that is strength-based, it's a process, and it's ongoing, it takes time, and to some extent the person can participate in the solution. It brings all people together involved closer to right relationships. And most of the situations we're talking about people in poverty, this is actually the situation they're in, and it's often the more appropriate response that can have long-term success and also appreciates that these people who might be materially poor are made in the image of God and already have strengths. And God is already working in their lives and in their neighborhoods. So now we're going to go back to the interview that we had with Andy and Ron. And Ron is going to talk a little bit about how his church actually doesn't do a whole lot around Christmas.
Of that, and we continue to do that, and the church still continues to do it, but at Christmas and Thanksgiving times, we realize that everybody is trying to help. Everybody wants to jump in and volunteer. You know, at the local mission, the mayor and the city councilors have to be there. The press has to be there. You know, everybody who's anybody is trying to serve there, and they literally had lineups of volunteers. And so we decided after a period of time that during Christmas and Thanksgiving, we could actually step back and take a break. We didn't really help out much in those places anyways because they did have volunteers, but we found that they had so many that Christmas time for a church plant was actually, at least in the broader scope of things, we'll get into more narrow scope later, but in the broader scope of things, we could actually step back. They didn't actually need us. There was lots of people who wanted to do things. And so we never, we didn't help out at, you know, the typical places, at least, like soup kitchen. and those kinds of things. The big Thanksgiving dinners and stuff, we just never got involved. The huge toy drives, all those kinds of things, we could just step back. They didn't need us, nor did we feel like they were really doing what we would like to see be done.
Yeah, and in that context, one of the things that I've seen is more meaningful and is really a way to participate, but yet do so in a more meaningful way that leaves the people who are involved with, especially with their children, with a sense of dignity, is bringing the toys to the church, or the gifts to the church, whether it's clothing or toys or whatever, and then having that available to people in the community who are needing to purchase that, probably at a subsidized price. And that seems to be more of an asset way to approach it, and it also builds on the relationships that you already have in those communities. Wendy, would this be a good time to just quickly review Lupton's principles?
Absolutely.
Okay, one of the things that I think a lot about at this time of year then is how are we actually fostering those relationships in the community during the whole year? Something that Ron, that you referred to again too, is to say, hey, how do we build on the relationships in our community so that at this time of year there's extra meaning to that? And so let me just share quickly what Lupton's principles are that I've been encouraging churches to think about as they think about community engagement. The principles that Bob Lupton talks about, and he's very much about the involvement of church in the community. And the first one is what he calls mutuality. And that is that God is already at work in that community. And so the role that we have as people wanting to come alongside of that is really to discern what is it that God is doing? Who's already engaged with that sense of purpose and mission that God has for that community. And then as we approach our involvement in the community, then the second principle that he talks about is participatory. And that, from a Reformed perspective, is one that we quickly recognize and say, yeah, it's recognizing that people are God's image bearers. And if we think about people in that context, our approach from the start will be quite different. And we will look at what gifts do they already have, and building on what you said, Wendy, about really looking at the assets, both personal assets of people, but also what are the community assets. The third one is what we would call an integrated ministry, or holism, or being holistic, and that's making sure that we include a discipleship path. We want to give words to our actions, and recognize that what we're doing is something that's also a means by which we can help people to recognize the spiritual depth to which their journey can be incorporated. And so how do we share Christ meaningfully in the context of our coming alongside of people and community? The fourth one is one that I really like, and I have to bear that in mind myself, and that's goes back to what we were just talking about. Engage the mind as well as the heart. At this time of year, it's so easy to get with all of the pressure to do something meaningful. That engages the heart. But how do we do that well? How do we make sure that when we approach a family at Christmas time, that we are recognizing that there's a lot of dimensions that are at play? how can we make sure that we don't minimize the role of the parents with the children, for instance, and shame the parents by just overwhelming the family with gifts. And I think that's often a big one that we think about. And as I watch things on television at this time of year, the outpouring of gifts that are done, or at the start of school with let's just give all these kids backpacks. I often wonder, how do the parents feel when they can't afford that themselves? There must be better ways to do this. So that's engaging the mind and the heart. And the last one is one that out of my experience of years in administration is measuring the impact. How do we know that our help is really doing what we desire to do, and making sure that is done. I think it's a real weakness in ministry at the church level of not really thinking through what the impact is that they want to accomplish as they come alongside people and community, and then actually develop feedback systems that tell them whether or not that's being done. And I think from a systems perspective, this one has always been very meaningful to me, and I think is one that's sorely lacking in our church context. So that's I think a brief overview of some of those principles that I really admire from Bob Lupton, and I think are a good summary of what you're talking about, Wendy, in terms of things being asset based, and then really thinking it through.
Mm-hmm. So we heard from Ron, who talked about how if a church doesn't have anything planned for this upcoming season, that maybe that's not a bad thing. So don't feel bad about that. But I'm wondering if either of you have any advice or words of wisdom for churches that maybe do have, a traditional giveaway or something planned. What are some things they can do, or things that are already in the works, I guess, to make those more in line with these principles?
It's a tricky thing, right? And I think I usually try to encourage people to do their best to think about the difference between doing for someone and doing it with them. I think that too often we, as these principles share and what Andy talked about, we end up shaming the parents. And many of us have seen the video of the father never shows up when these gift packages come. The mother's there and the children are there, but father's disappeared. And when we think about how do they define poverty, they do use psychological terms of shame and just words that make them less than, right, as people. And it has much less to do then with the actual physical needs that they have, as it has to do with their psychological needs and their image of God needs. And so I think try to take whatever it is that you're doing and think it through from the side of the people who are receiving, and do your best not to shame them. And we can come up with some examples, but you have to do this in your own context and think it through. But I'll share a couple of things that have worked just practically. In a big scale, we used to work with Salvation Army Church, and we didn't do a whole lot with them again around Christmas time because volunteers line up at the Salvation Army. But we did, interact around this with them and ask them questions. And they, the one that we had, they would get many, many toys, right, donated to them. And after a time, they set them all up in the gym, and they would allow parents to come in and to pick toys or to purchase at a very minimal amount toys, and that enhances their self-esteem. They were actually allowed to pick what they wanted. They also could pay for it minimally. This helped the Salvation Army out for their other programs. It was a very minimal amount, but it was something they could do. If you couldn't even afford that, you could volunteer. So you could come and help sort toys, and you could do other things. And they just provided, there were many tasks that could be done, and they would prioritize these families and help them they always got to volunteer first. It wasn't us who could volunteer. These people who were going to be recipients would volunteer first. On top of that, then, after a few years of this, they realized that the children also feel a lot of this angst and shame around this time. Friends are getting toys and giving things to their parents. And so they set up actually a separate room. They always had childcare, so parents were able to shop and children were taken care of. But then they set up a separate room where children could shop for their parents. And it actually allowed them to go into a separate room with supervision. They could pick out one or two things. They could purchase them. And they had different ways that you could purchase toys or purchase gifts for your parents. And then they helped them gift wrap them. And, this whole process of allowing them to do it for their parents and with their parents. So that was one way. I mean, if it's a pretty big thing, we often have a tree and you pick something off and you buy it and you give it and so things like that. And they're very anonymous. So we try as much as possible to personalize things. As a group too, I would encourage churches as much as possible during this time of year to focus on people you already know. Hopefully over the other 11 months of the year, you've been building relationships, you have fringe members, you have people on the outside that maybe you've had a touch with once or twice. You've already have a bit of a relationship. If you can work with those kinds of people at this time and see what they have to bring to the table and what you can work with them on. And so we would have families over for dinner, for example, and we would invite them, but we'd always invite them and say, so what can you bring? Mm-hmm. And they would bring whatever they could. And we would ensure that during the meal, it was put somewhere prominently and that we ate it. It wasn't the little cheap dish on the side. You just ensure that it's there and you thank them for it and you make sure that it's part of everything else. It's not just something that's quickly put there. And so thinking through things like that, we have hosted this at our home the last time. One family literally showed up 2 hours late. Everything was put away. We brought everything back out and we ate kind of again with them because time had a whole different meaning for them. And these are the kinds of things that you end up doing, but it was very personal. They didn't even, when they came in and they ate with us, it was like they didn't even realize that they weren't supposed to be there anymore and everybody else had pretty much left. And that was okay. We could just roll with it in this way. But if you have a big dinner, it's going to be at a certain time and there's all these schedules that have to fit. So we try our best, as you tried the best that you can to use a personal approach to invite people and to do things with them instead of always for them. And I think you can put that lens on with almost anything that your church is doing. It's clearly one of the reasons why we didn't do other things, because they were just too anonymous, or we didn't really know if they were going to help or not. And we have many examples of that, but we'd probably open a can of worms. So.
Thanks. Well, I do want to touch a little bit on the international piece. So, it seems like it would be fairly easy or easier to have relationships with people locally in your community. But this time of year, we also want to teach the children and bring attention to the global poverty. And I hear a lot from parents who really want to do something tangible. And so some do participate in the World Renew gift catalog, but sometimes it's hard to really picture what that looks like on the ground. And so, Andy, I'm wondering if you could talk about a time when maybe you saw a gift catalog item in action, just to make it a little more personal.
Yeah. Was probably during the height of the AIDS crisis in Africa, Wendy. I was visiting a village in Uganda, and the women in that community, there were a number of widows that were HIV/AIDS widows. So they had been left alone to raise grandchildren or children, and many of them had received goats as part of the project. So the goat became their livelihood. And what was so neat was that it wasn't just that the income from goats and the resulting kids coming from the mother goat, was a source of income but it was also a means of feeding children for the milk. What struck me the most was the fact that as these women were working together, they had developed a community of strength. I call it a community of strength. What traditionally happens when you become a widow, the family of the husband can come and take away the land that the widow is even living on, their small portion of land that they have. But these women had become such a strong community that they could actually demand that land stay with them. And the law in the land had changed, so they were obviously appealing to the law of the land, even though the tradition was still that often they lost the land. But because of what they had learned to be together and through the program of receiving that, coming alongside of, they had become a strong community together that could insist on, hey, we not only have the means to take care of ourselves and our children, but we know that we can insist on the community upholding the law of the land, allowing us to stay on the land and not becoming a widow that needs to go out and beg for a living, or even resort to, in many cases, what happens is resorting to prostitution. So just that was a very, very vivid reminder of what happens when we can come alongside of a community that way and it's not a free gift, because often they have to give back one of the kids from the program, or resulting kids of the goat, to another family in the community. So it's really one that builds community alongside of it.
Wow, thanks, Andy. All right, at this time, I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves if they have a question. So you should, if you do have a question, if you kind of have the participant panel open and go under the More section, there's a little thumbs up sign for those of you who are out inland. So if you have a question, go ahead and give the thumbs up sign, and then I will call on you to unmute yourself, just so that we have a little bit of order. Okay, so what are your questions from the audience?
While we're waiting for someone to pop up here,
Sure.
Wendy, I just like what Ron said as a simple reminder is think about with instead of for. If we take nothing else away from this time together, that really is, I think, sort of a really easy reminder. And then look for organizations in your community, like Ron was saying, that already have that same mentality, and then work alongside of those organizations. What are the avenues that are already open to you that share that same sense of priority?
Absolutely. Okay, I'm not seeing any thumbs up. I'm not sure if that's because people aren't sure where to find that. So if you do have a question, anyone out there, please feel free to unmute and just go ahead and ask. And if you have an example of something that has worked well for your church, we'd love to hear that as well.
Sounds like Jesse's ready to weigh in.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Jesse.
Hey, great. Thanks for this, guys. It's been great to hear all the ideas and examples. I had a comment about another possible idea from kind of the compassion and mercy side of things. When it comes to Christmas time, it's often a time where people can feel a bit of a loneliness, and sometimes the tough feelings of grief are often arise at the holiday season for some. And one of the ideas for deacons to get involved is definitely with seniors. Sometimes they're quite isolated or they're missing family. And a number of churches I've heard have done really good seniors lunches or seniors hampers around Christmas time, just to connect at a more personal level with the seniors in their churches. And the other thing that I've recently heard about, but have not participated myself, is the idea of the Blue Christmas service. And so a couple of churches in our classes, they hold a Blue Christmas service, and it really is a time of just reflection and remembering those that have been lost in the past year, or remembering those that really come to mind that they've lost over the Christmas season. And so deacons can really encourage their pastors or worship teams to look at what a Blue Christmas service could be like within their context, and just give a chance for people to come and reflect and have maybe a liturgy around that. And it's something that can be very impactful.
Jesse, one of the churches today just posted their whole liturgy for the Blue Christmas service on the network. So there's some good resources that are available already regarding that.
Yeah, perfect.
I'd also want to comment a little bit. I think this is a great time of year, you're right, to connect with seniors and to connect with those people in the church. But I would just be a little bit cautious that if that's the only thing you're doing, then you're probably not stretching yourself enough during the season. I mean, it's not like we don't want to do outreach in this time of year. If your ministry at this time of year is only to the seniors or to people that are inside your church, as important as that it is, I would encourage you to look beyond that. There's people in the local seniors home or something who are lonely, and again, we did this. We would talk to the people in the seniors home close by and say, which ones don't get visits, and invite them into that context as well. Always think about what's the next thing that you can do. How can you grow this past the group in your church? And I understand there's these people in the church, and they definitely, you want to do that. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying try to think about what else you could do that would add on to that. And if there is a seniors home down the block, around the corner, a mile away, give them a call and say, are there any here who don't get involved in Christmas? And there's always some whose families are far away, or who just for whatever reasons can't. And if you can, or can't be involved in, or aren't involved in something else locally, if you can drive down and pick them up or somehow build a relationship with them. Again, we had ministry in a seniors home, so we had that relationship, and they were sort of those fringe people I mentioned earlier that you can invite into things. Those are the ones you can really focus on at this time of year. So I think it's got to be a both and I would always encourage you to just stretch a little bit more. But as Andy said, I would also say it's complicated. This is not simple at this time of year. And we're used to charity. We're not as used to empowering and growing past that. So I don't want to sound like this is simple stuff. I realize it's not. And even probably most of the people here, they're already halfway on this and they understand it. But when you present this, sometimes, when I've talked about some of these things in churches, they go, "Whoa, we've been doing this for 40 years, and it's always worked." And I get that. I know it's complicated, and so don't hear me saying that this is just simple and a little switch, but it's a big switch. It's turning away from a charity mindset and that we do, and we have the power, and we're going to help you. We're going to fill in all your blanks towards a mindset of we're going to do this together, and we're going to look for people and build relationships, and we're in it for the long term. We're not just going to the soup kitchen and feeding and getting on camera. No, if you're going to get involved with that, be involved for the long term. Get involved with those people's wives. Otherwise, please don't start. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and if you're not, Ron, then use these opportunities at Christmas time to begin thinking about that long term, right? And say, are we creating relationships, or is there an organization that we're involved with now, or a home that we're involved with now that right. can take us into ministry for the whole year?
Exactly.
Great point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of that, so we talked about this is helping that helps at Christmas and beyond. So thinking about the beyond part, if churches are interested in learning more about this topic, if they're Canadian, yeah, Ron, what would you recommend that they do, and what kind of help might be available to them?
Oh, thanks. We didn't discuss this before, Wendy. No, but really, I mean, we, much like you do in the States, we do run the Helping Without Harming workshops. There's one coming up in Edmonton. There's one coming up in Nanaimo. There's a couple others that people have been asking about. I think it is a real key piece. I do encourage people, if you really on your own you want to start, it's like you said at the beginning, read that When Helping Hurts book, and then read the follow-up ones, How to Help Without Hurting in Church Benevolence, and How to Help Without Hurting in Short-Term Missions, and also the toxic charity books that Lupton Center's put out. I on your own, you can learn a lot just by reading those books. And then you can certainly contact, the local diaconal ministry developers and diaconal ministry people in Canada at any time, and we'll help with these kinds of conversations. We certainly will help to facilitate them. Most of the DMDs, the diaconal ministry developers that we have, and there's 15 of them, 17 now, I think, right across Canada, they're available to help you walk through these conversations. So I would encourage you to contact them then as a church, and if they can't help, then it gets bumped up the line until one of us can help. So we definitely are willing to do that.
Right. And Andy, I know you've been working with some of the deacons in the U.S. So if a U.S. church has questions about how better to get involved, what advice and resources might you have for them?
Well, there are still a number of places around the U.S. where we have deacons conferences. And so there's always avenues there for people to be involved, especially during the whole year. I mean, getting involved at Christmas time is probably a good entree point, but that would be, I think, a way to do that. And again, looking for organizations in your community that come at it with a with type of mentality. I think that Toxic Charity and When Helping Hurts the books have had quite an impact on many organizations. So they are looking for ways to change up how we respond, especially at Christmas time. I'd like to throw it back to you too, Wendy, because I think one of the really neat things that World Renew offers is offering churches a partnership in the ministry with communities internationally. So when we're looking for international opportunities, here's a way that you can be involved with an international community throughout the whole year. It's a reciprocal kind of relationship. And then if there would be something that would be special at Christmas, you have a relationship that it's based on that you can enter into for that time of year. And again, it can be mutually one of learning and engagement that I think is really quite exciting. So I'll set you up for that one.
Perfect. Yes, that's great. So yes, we do have our gift catalog, of course, and it's in many churches. But yeah, we do have the ability to set up these long-term relationships. So in Canada, it would be Peter Baltice as the primary contact, and then the U.S. Contact myself, and we're available to help sort of help you figure out your missions plan, because that's probably another thing as we're getting to be a smaller globe. It's amazing how small the world is. I'm in a Facebook group from this church in Uganda, and I get to see their baptisms and new conversions, and it's just really neat. You feel like you're a part of it, even though it's halfway around the world. So the world is getting smaller, and our neighborhood is near and far. So we would love to help churches develop those types of relationships.
I would also then encourage people, and in Canada in particular, but you can obviously access it from anywhere, to go to our website in Diaconal Ministries Canada and look under community opportunity, community engagement material. There's a whole lot of things there that we have. So if you're really looking long-term, you might want to get involved in community opportunity scans, which help you with the ABC, the asset-based community development material, and how to do a community opportunity scan, which helps you learn how to work with different organizations in your community. So we offer grants to help you do that. We offer ways to get new things started or to partner with other groups. If you go to our website and just look under engaging communities, you find quite a bit of resources around that. One of the big pieces that we try to do is help to animate deacons, to animate congregations to get into their communities. And so, right, we have a lot of tools in that area. And when we don't have tools, we certainly will come alongside you and help you with that, including some financial assistance and so forth. So have a look at the website and check some of that out.
Great. Well, I will make sure to send a follow-up email to all the participants today, just sharing some of those email links and links to the books that we've recommended. So before we close our time together, I just want to give one last opportunity. If anyone out there in internet land has any questions or comments for Andy or Ron.
Hi, I don't know. Can you hear me? This is
Don.
Hey,
Don.
Hi, Don.
I would just like to thank you all for doing this. It's a really good reminder of a lot of things, about working with people rather than for, and the importance of relationships. Those are, just really, good reminders. So thank you. And for the talking points, because as I talk to churches too, sometimes having the talking points that you've mentioned is really good. I just had one question for you, Wendy, regarding the giving calendar or the giving catalog. Is that still something that folks can sign up for? Is there a deadline on that before the Christmas season, or is that open for a while yet? Can you just touch base on that a little bit more, that giving catalog?
Right, so that's actually available year-round. We have people use the gift catalog for anniversaries and birthdays and graduations. So yeah, it's open year-round. There's no deadline. We can still overnight some catalogs to your church if you would like. Otherwise, you can. It's also available all online, and you can download gift cards and videos, all kinds of resources to really help make that a promotion in your church if you'd like. Okay, anyone else? All right, well, thanks, Don, and thank you, Andy and Ron, for your time today.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
All right, well, I hope to do this again. And yes, to all of you out there, hopefully you've learned some things, got some new ideas, and yeah, just make sure you all have a blessed Christmas.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yep.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.